The following is a conversation with Joakim Engberg, a mixed martial arts coach and one of the greatest minds within the game. He has coached at the very highest level, including being on Alistair Overeem's coaching team. If you are an up-and-coming fighter or just have an interest within mixed martial arts, then this is definitely worth a listen. It's a truly insightful conversation. Enjoy.
What do you think makes a great fighter?
Hmm. I mean, coaches love to talk about the science of fighting, right? The science of boxing and all of these stuff. But in the name, it's mixed martial arts. So it's a mix between those things. I think it's the science of fighting and all these techniques, but there's also elements that is much harder to like put your finger on. There is a level of artistry in there too. So I think a great fighter needs to have good fighter. You just need one of those, but a great fighter, somebody like John Jones, need to have elements of both, and then you can break those down to smaller components. You need the technical part, you need the physique, and you need the mindset and all of that stuff. But yeah, that's my answer.
So you say break it down into both. There's two parts there that you're talking about. What are those two parts again?
I would say like you need the technical part, you need a physical part, and the tactical part, and then the fourth is the mindset. So if you can, the way I see it, if you can have an advantage over your opponent in three of those areas, then you're almost guaranteed to win. If you have an advantage in two areas, so you're more physical and you're tougher mentally, but your opponent's more technical and smarter tactically, then it's a toss-up. You don't really know who's going to win, but you want to have like as many of those components on your side as possible.
Yeah. What do you think when it comes down to the mindset? Talk to me a little bit more about that specifically. What do you think the mindset needs to be?
Man, I mean, first of all, like we're talking professional MMA now. Like, if you begin your journey as a professional martial artist, then the first thing you have to be able to accept and deal with is to be disappointed or losses, because there's going to be a lot of disappointments down the road. And even if you have a perfect record, I'm sure there's going to be like many times where you prepare like crazy for a fight, and then 1 week before you injure your knee or your opponent injures his knee. So I think you have to know how to lose to be able to win in the long run. And and there's so many components to this. And then so that's the number one thing. And then you have to be able to work hard, like really, really, really hard, a lot harder than anybody really understands, over a prolonged period of time. Because I see a lot of guys there, they can work really hard for a couple of months or maybe a year, but then they start fading. And the best guys are those who can keep the pressure and being like keep the grit for an extended period of time. And then also you have to be able to deal with the pressure, and like the higher you come, the more you have to be able to deal with pressure. There's an incredible amount of pressure on UFC fighters that most people don't understand. Like one of my guys now, he had like a couple of thousand of hate messages on Instagram from Turks who's fighting a Turkish fighting, and then everybody has an opinion, so you have to be able to let those things slide.
Yeah, I guess as you get up in those levels higher and higher, and you get into promotions like the UFC, that is something that comes with it. I was listening to John Kavanagh talk. I don't remember who he was talking to, but he was talking about how he recommends that some people don't even turn pro because of everything like you're talking about there, the external pressures that have nothing to do with the actual fighting itself.
Exactly. So when you go from amateur to pro, you have to realize that you're shifting from a sport to the entertainment business, or a 50-50 kind of thing. it's no longer just a sport. I mean, if you just want to fight, then we can find fights for you. You're just not going to get paid. But if you want to get paid, then you have to realize that part of what you're doing is entertainment, and there's a lot of different stuff coming with that. And some guys are great athletes and great at the sport, but they're not good entertainers, or they can't deal with that extra pressure that comes with being an entertainer.
Yeah. Do you think that is incredibly important? Because I feel like you see some guys, even at the higher levels, that don't really worry about the entertainment side of it, and they still, they're still in main events. They're still,
Yeah.
sometimes they get their championships and things like
I
that.
don't think you have to be like try and be entertaining necessarily, but you have to deal with all the other stuff that comes with being like the center of attention, right? Like all the critique and all the fans, all the people, like, because one thing is dealing with critique that's hard in itself, but then you also have to be able to deal with all the guys, all the yes sayers, all the guys who say you're the best, and you try to pull you away from what made you great in the beginning, right? Usually discipline and hard work, and now you have a party over here, and you have some coach telling you what you want to hear, and I think that destroys as many fighters as the negativity, right? The extra positive or like the yes sayers around you, because they're gonna be there. The more eyes get on you, and it doesn't even have to be like in a UFC. It could be like you're the local star at your local fight event or whatever. But especially these guys that go from maybe not having anything or not being anything and goes to being somebody like really quick, and everything that comes with that. I mean, that's difficult to deal with, and there's no manual, and there's no like we used to fighting. As a fighter, we used to fighting. That's what we do every day. We're not really, that scared about getting hurt or taking a punch or whatever. We're used to that. All that stuff is in our everyday lives, but we're not really used to stepping in front of a crowd with some ring girl with her ass out and all that kind of stuff. That is not our everyday life. So you have to be able to deal with that. Then if you're entertaining or not when you fight, that's not the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned earlier on about people don't understand how hard these athletes work. I witnessed that. I went out to a gym called Tiger Muay Thai, which I'm sure you've more than likely heard of. I went out there, and that was the first time I'd seen fighters at that level training, and it really shook me. Just how hard they work and how consistent they are, and 3-4 sessions a day sometimes in intense heat out in Thailand, obviously.
And there's one thing of working hard and having like a more or less a guarantee outcome. Like, okay, I studied to be a doctor. I know if I do this 5 years and at least I'm in the middle of my class, then I'm going to be a doctor in 5 years and I'm going to start making money. As a fighter, there's no guarantee. You can work your ass off. You can work harder than anybody else, but you just might up with a knee injury or it could all be for basically nothing. So you have to love the process and you have to focus on the process. The outcome is never promised, right? And that takes a different type of person to be able to take those kind of risks, because it's a risk. I'm going to spend 10 years of doing something that I know is going to hurt my body and my head too, and there's no guaranteed outcome from that. Like the majority of people is not going to make it, right? And even the guys who make it, it's not going to be, it's not always going to have a beautiful ending.
Do you ever work with your fighters on building a career outside of fighting?
We started doing that more and more, actually, because I grow in experience too. Like this coaching thing. I mean, I've been coaching for a long time, but there's really no manual, and the sport is new. So it's as I get older, I start seeing. I've seen a couple of careers start and end. And then you realize that it is important to try to build something parallel to your fighting. And I think that could be a way also to release some pressure, because there's a huge amount of pressure if fighting is all you do and all you can do to get your income. and maybe one of the reasons why people keep on fighting for too long. So I definitely think it's a good thing, and then I try to support my guys and girls as much as I can to build something on the side.
Yeah, because I think when people get into martial arts, they might just start like me. I just started as a hobby, and it was
Yeah.
something that I loved, and it was
Mhm.
something that sort of distracted me from everything else that was going on at the time, and
Yeah.
it was great for that. But I think sometimes, obviously, when you're a professional fighter, you get really it gets very serious and it gets
Yeah.
very, very intense, and you have to go to very dark places, especially as you go into fight camp, and obviously when you go to fight as well, and it can kind of lose that joyful element of what martial arts
Yeah.
is. Martial arts is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I think that building something outside of that, whether you start coaching or
Yeah.
whatever, I think just bringing that joy and playfulness back into martial arts is something that's what I try to do when I take a class. I try and
Yeah.
make it playful, and
Yeah.
times where you have to be serious. But talk to me
Yeah.
about.
I mean, I think it's for me, it's been hard to juggle those things because at the same time you have to be almost fanatical, right? That you have, if you want to reach the top, and I think like if you want to fight professionally, there's no other way to do it
Mm.
because there's only two outcomes: either you're eating somebody or they're eating you. Like that, that's the way it is. And to be able to perform at the top, you have to be almost fanatical. This has to take priority over everything else in your life. But at the same time, you're absolutely right to what you're saying, that when you view it like that, then a lot of the fun elements and maybe the reason why you got into it in the beginning kind of disappears. But I don't think that is unique to martial arts or MMA. I think it's common for everybody who's an entrepreneur try to do, what they love for a living. And you always see these people saying like, yeah, do what you love and you never work for a day of your life. And I really do what I love, but there's a lot of hard work.
Mm.
Every day is not like woo, especially when you've been doing it for 10 years, 15 years, like, and you have these ups and downs and yeah, so it's tough balancing those things, but if you can, I think that would be the absolutely best. But as far as how to do it, I don't know if I'm your guy. Yeah.
What approach do you take towards? Okay, there's a couple of parts to this question. First part, general training. Say you've just got nobody in fight camp or whatever. It's just a basic period of time. How do you approach that sort of more relaxed version of training? What's your approach to that?
No, but the way I see it, because I'm kind of, I mean, my way of teaching and talking is not for everybody. I'm kind of clear with that. I would say I'm more like, people go to a gym and you have some guys who go to like a gym class, whatever, body pump or whatever they call it. And you have some guys going to CrossFit. Some guys like CrossFit, and that's kind of the extreme version of that. I'm like, I really want to make the most of the time on the mat, because I know we have so little time to train. Most normal people don't have a lot of time to train, right? You have 3 or 4 times a week, and then you have these professional guys who train like 2 times a day, and like just in a couple of days they do more than you do in a week. So I really try and optimize every minute we have on the mat, but sometimes that optimization is just to have fun and do other things. Maybe that's the best in the moment. But even when we have like relaxed periods and we don't have a camp, uh, I really try to make the most of the time. I'm I'm really like we have a very high tempo, not just in exercises, but between exercises. And I really want it to be like, and people get used to this, and after a while it's not hard to train like that. It's just how you train. It's a habit, and when things become a habit, it's no longer, you don't really have that inertia to overcome in the beginning. That's hard. So a lot of times when my guys go to other gyms, they're like, oh, this is so slow, or this is so like uh, so I think for me, I keep a pretty high tempo all year round. And then, camps, you increase the intensity and stuff like that, but it's not that much difference. The major difference is that you maybe you're more focused towards a specific opponent or tactic, right?
Okay. So how do you maintain that? How do you maintain that year round? I don't know much about how many coaches you have, or if it's just coaching or what. But how do you make sure that you get the most out of every single class, whether you're taking the class or whether you've got somebody else taking the class? How have you ingrained that into your gym?
I mean, for me, it's just, to be honest, it's just been just a daily grind. Just every single class, try to put myself in that mindset that we need to get the most out of these minutes. You have 90 minutes. We have 90 minutes classes, and I want you to be better version of yourself than you were when you stepped into that class every single day. So, and it's not easy. That is my struggle as a coach, but I feel that's my role, to get the most out of you. And as hard as you work on improving your fighting, I need to work on improving myself as an instructor and the energy I give to you. So I'm just for me, it's just try to make it a habit. And once it becomes a habit, then it's a little bit easier. It's not going to be easy, but it's easier. And I try to remind people, and hopefully during the days where I feel a little bit lower or weaker, then my team can bring me up. And that's usually what happens. Sometimes I come here and I was like, fuck, I'm going to do this again, because it's 6 days a week and there's a lot of, and then I see some guys on the mat, like working on some techniques or, being just all excited. And now we have a lot of young guys and they give me a lot of energy, to be honest, like 16 to 18 years old. So those help to motivate me and push me forward on the days where I don't feel like, I can give 100%. So I think it's a team effort,
Yeah. It's definitely a grind, isn't it? And there are those days where you just don't want to do it, but it's like anything, isn't it? And
Yeah. And I mean, I think those days are the most important, right? Because that's where you can gain an edge over your competitors. Because in the end, you have to compete with somebody else. And if you can have a couple of more days where you like give it all compared to your competitors, that's going to be your edge. And it might just be 1 or 2%, but that's what we look for in the professional business, is just to get a slight edge. So that's how I view it. I just want to get an edge over my competitors, and my team to get an edge over our competitors, that we just work a little bit more focused or a little bit harder, just a little bit more.
How important do you feel it is to lead by example as a coach in terms of sort of training regimes and taking part in the classes and all of that? Do you think that's important? Or talk to me about that.
Yeah, I wish I were better at that, to be honest. Not so much taking part in the class, because when if I'm sparring or doing something, then I'm not looking at you and giving you feedback, right? So I feel when I join the classes, quality goes down, because I can't give feedback constantly. Like, if I'm not joining the class and I can give feedback, and I should probably be in better shape and stuff like that. Take care of my diet better, and I do think it's important to be a good role model for your students. Yeah. But then again, there is a lot of coaches who really are not, but still have good results. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I spoke to a guy called Stefan Della Rey, who is one of the coaches in Dricus du Plessis' team.
Cool.
I asked him a similar question, and he said that he doesn't think it matters because the athlete has a different goal to the coach.
Yeah,
the athlete
that's
wants
true.
to be the best fighter in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, again, there are different perspectives on it. If you just look for a professional fighter, that's more like a business kind of relationship. Like, I had some guys bringing me into, to Holland or Dubai or whatever, and I coached them during for a fight camp, and then my relationship with them is of course close, but it's different. Here at the gym at home, like I told you, I have a bunch of younger guys, and I feel it's important for me to be a good role model, because their parents trust me with their kids and whatever, and I would prefer not to use build fighters, because in the end, what does that mean? I would prefer to build good people, that can translate the things they learned in fighting to real life too, or life after career. And to be able to teach those elements, I think you should be a good role model.
Yeah,
So it depends on your perspective.
yeah, yeah. I definitely see both sides to it. I think
Yeah,
you don't want to be that person that never trains and not
yeah.
improving yourself, because
But
then
at the same time, I have a hard time with these like jiu-jitsu guys who try to give like life advice to their students while they're living in a like one room apartment, and don't really have their life together at all. It's like I really try to avoid that, telling some, guy older than me, with 3 kids and a successful business, but no, you should, this is how you should. So, yeah, there's definitely a fine line there between where it gets a little bit too much. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think everybody's seen that
Yeah.
where
Because I know how to fight doesn't mean I know anything else, you know.
yeah, yeah. Just because you have a black belt in something, it doesn't mean you're some masterful philosopher.
Definitely not. I know because I'm a black belt.
Yeah. On that, how much importance do you place on belts?
On what?
On belts. So,
Belts? Not at all.
okay.
Not at all. We have a jiu-jitsu section that I'm not, right now at least, that involved with, and of course they have their belts and stuff like that. And I can definitely see the advantages of it for people who don't really compete, and also after the career. So it gives you a natural place in the group, even if you're not fighting anymore. So MMA has that kind of problem where, okay, you're done with your career, unless you really start coaching, then there's really no, spot for you in the group,
Mm.
because these younger guys is gonna run over you and stuff like that. But in jiu-jitsu, you have these older black belts that everybody knows they're not in the best shape, but you respect and understand their skills, right? So I can see the advantages uh, with belts, but I don't really put a lot of emphasis on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like them. I think they're quite, they definitely have a place, but I also think that, I mean, you've seen it happen with a karate black belt is now seen as a bit of a joke, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if I'm being honest, I can long term, I can see that starting to happen with a jiu-jitsu black
yeah,
belt as well.
100%. I agree.
Because,
Yeah, that's a little bit sad, yeah, because jiu-jitsu black belt used to be like, I remember when I got my purple belt in Sweden, that was like 20 years ago or something. That was like a big thing because there were no colored belts at all in Europe at that time, and yeah, that was a good feeling, and I yeah, it gives you clear goals too. It could be hard if you're not competing. If you're competing, then you have your clear goals, like I want to win this and that. But if you're not competing, then it's kind of hard after 1 or 2 years. Okay, I want to improve, but it's nice to have some like something very concrete, and like, okay, now I became a purple belt or brown belt or whatever. Then yeah, I can see the advantages of it.
hmm,
Definitely.
yeah. So do you have a belt system for your jiu-jitsu guys?
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. But then we had a jiu-jitsu coach there. He's kind of responsible for that, so I don't get involved with that.
Okay.
That's his
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
I want to understand a little bit more about your journey. So I
Mhm.
think when you talk to a coach, sometimes you can talk about their fighters and
Mhm.
their opinions on all of the other things, but you don't ever really get to know much about the journey of the actual coach themselves. So talk to me about your journey. Where did you start in martial arts?
I started my first martial art was judo because my dad was a judoka. So I started training judo when I was like 8 or 9 or something like that. And I did that for a little while. But then of course, I'm old, so during that time Bruce Lee was the thing. And I wanted to train Jeet Kune Do, but there was no Jeet Kune Do in Sweden. So I had a mat teacher who was teaching Wing Chun, the Kung Fu style, and I started doing that. And parallel to that, I started training Muay Thai, and I kind of realized that, man, these guys, the Kung Fu guys, can't really fight. So I started getting more into the full contact thing, and at the same time, we had a UFC 1 and 2, and I wanted to train Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, but there was no Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Sweden. There was something called shoot fighting. We had this guy, my first instructor, August Valle, and he went over to the US and trained with a guy, Bart Whale. It was kind of a phony, but anyway, he brought home that kind of Japanese style of MMA, and we call it shoot fighting. And I had my first fight at 97, 1997, and it was open palm strikes, pancrase style. If you've seen those old fights, yeah, that's what we did. So my first fight was 25 minutes. Yeah, I actually had Thai boxing fights before that, and from there I went on competing for many years. I won the Swedish championship many times, and you know, fought in boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, and eventually turned pro. I was pro for a couple of years, up and down results, because I was teaching at the same time. We didn't really have any coaches back in those days. We used a bunch of guys who kind of liked fighting and helped each other, right? And then parallel to that, my career kind of ended. I had a serious neck injury. I got asked by Alistair Overeem if I wanted to coach him, and that was before he's been going back and forth to my gym, and that was before his first UFC fight against Brock Lesnar. So I went to him to California and Las Vegas, started coaching him there, and then that was the beginning of my true coaching journey. I was coaching a long time before that, but I was more focused on myself and just my guys, right? So that was how I kind of started coaching.
Did you always want to be a coach?
I think it was in the back of my mind from the beginning, actually. Yeah, I don't know why, but some guys are meant to be coaches or teachers. Some guys are meant to do other stuff. And I actually come from a long line of teachers in my family. I think there were like teachers at some little island for like 200 or 300 years, something like that. So across many generations. Yeah.
What do you enjoy about coaching the most? It doesn't have to be one thing, but it can be an array of things. But what is it about coaching that you love?
I love the daily grind, coming to the gym, just talking to everybody, just working towards something with somebody else, trying to help somebody reach their goals. And I love the ups and downs. You almost become bipolar in this business because, and the better contact or connection you have with your students, the more emotional these wins and losses are, right? But it feels like it gives a lot of depth to my life and a lot of, I feel very rich in that way. There's a lot of dramas going on, not in a negative way, but positive kind of dramas and life story being played out. And I'm a small part in all these kind of stories. And I think as I grow older, it became easier and easier for me to really enjoy and take joy in somebody else's success. As I was younger, that wasn't as easy or something that came naturally. Yeah, you win and that's fine, that's good, you're on my team, that's good. But now I can really feel it, like, and I feel that makes my life really rich.
Yeah. I always think that obviously being a fighter, you have to be very selfish, and
Yeah.
it's about you. But as a coach, you get the joy of being part of everybody's journey.
Yeah.
It's really, I love it.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, I love it too. I want to be doing, because I sacrifice a lot to get here. Like, there's been a lot of times where things didn't really work out, either with business partners or you had the COVID and you had not getting a building permit, and there's been a million things where, like, I'm on the verge of stopping and just getting a fucking normal job, but there's something that pulls you in. Like I feel responsible to my students, right? I really feel like that they're coming to me and they're putting, they ask me to help them reach their dreams and aspirations, and I feel that means something.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really think about, is like they see these big beautiful gyms and everything, but they don't see the hard work that goes on to build that gym and to get it to that point. It's, I mean, even just literally getting, like, putting the mats down, putting a boxing ring up, like it's
hard, just a hard labor.
It's hard graft. So how long have you been coaching sort of full time for?
Man, I don't know, maybe it's at least 15 years. Because at first I had a kind of a nice opportunity where one of my students, his friend was opening a gym in the city of Gothenburg, uh, and their like group classes weren't doing really well. So they're like, "You guys want to move here?" And we're like, "Okay, fuck it, we move there." And we kind of blew up overnight. So overnight we had like, you know, almost like 400 beginners or something like that. You
Wow.
know, because it was just that timing was just perfect. So you know, but at the same time, I didn't really, you know, I wasn't really serious about coaching or teaching and that's kind of stuff because I was, you know, busy with my own career. So those first couple of years, you know, I would have done things very differently now. Well,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So as a young coach myself that wants to get
mm,
to the level that you've got to in terms of coaching, what's a piece of advice or wisdom that you could sort of pass down to me or anybody who's listening that wants to do the same thing to get to that level?
mm. It's just, I mean, same thing for the athletes. Like everything has to build on hard work. You know, you have to work hard and you have to study. You have to study the fights and you have to study the athletes and you know, because what's the number one thing you want from a coach? It's competence, right? Like you know, some guys I know they don't even really love their coach, but he's competent. And when you step into a cage, that's really who you want to have beside you. Might not be the nicest guy, and might not, but you want a general who can tell you, you know, what to do, how to fucking survive that situation, and how to win and thrive. And then you know, I'm talking about fighters now. And then of course, like people who train for fun or like, you know, for exercise is a different thing. But if you want to be a professional coach, you have to be competent. Uh, because again, they, you know, there's these fighters put things at risk. You know, they might not be the same guy coming out of the cage as they are coming into the cage. So that would be my number one thing. And to get competence, I think, you know, sometimes you have to. I do that myself. Sometimes I use travel, you know, try to meet some other coaches just to get, you know, different input. You know, I have a lot of online relationship with guys and people I met throughout the years. You know, we send techniques back and forth, and you know, I constantly try to improve and learn. On top of that, doing video studies and stuff like that. So, but that would be my number one thing. Make sure you're competent, and when you have the competence, then you know what you do with that. That's up to you. Like then build relationships with people, because I think that's people need to trust you to, you know, listen to you in these kind of high stress situations. So you know, build trust with people and be the safe spot. They have to know that you show up every single day. uh you know, there can't be any doubt where what you're gonna do. Like you have to be the constant in all this.
How important do you think that building relationships is? You mentioned that a couple of times there. Do you think that's a really important thing? Not
Yeah,
even to become a really good coach, but even as a fighter
yeah,
or whatever you're trying to do. How
for
important
sure. I
building
mean, the
those?
number one reason to build a relationship in my mind is that it changes the journey and it makes it a lot more valuable. Because I've been on both sides as a fighter. I've been, you know, times where I didn't really have anybody on my side. I remember winning a fight in England, uh, Ultimate Warrior Challenge. I won that in like 30 seconds, but I just switched from my old team and kind of started my own thing, and I didn't really have anybody in my corner. I just went there on my own. I know another coach that kind of was coaching at the same time, and I won easy. I went out and I called my dad, and it was like after that it was like, okay, let's go to the hotel and go to sleep. It wasn't really, didn't really feel anything. Wasn't, and I had other times where, you know, I had friends, I had coaches and training partners around, and winning in during those circumstances is a totally different experience. So I think that's the number one reason why you want to build relationships, because it's gonna, you know, make the good times better and the hard times easier. And you know, and as a coach, I think it's crucial to understand your fighter, understand what, you know, his mindset, why his mindset is the way it is, and you know, so you can guide him better. You know?
Hmm. Yeah, that coach fighter relationship I think is incredibly important.
Yeah.
I think I think it's one of the most important things that you can do is to work on that with your fighter.
For sure. It has to be trust, you know, there has to be trust there, because you're going to ask them to do kind of extreme things and put themselves at risk. And they need to know that, you know, they can trust that you're going to be there. I mean, I want my fighters to know that if something goes wrong in the octagon, I'm going to jump over that fence and I'm going to be fighting alongside them, you know. And, you know, I'm ready to protect them at any cost, you know, not just, you know, physically, but, you know, comes to choosing fights and all that kind of stuff too.
How do you approach coaching a day one beginner? Because that looks very different, obviously, to coaching a high level professional fighter. How do you handle a day one beginner?
I love to teach beginners, to be honest. I love to teach beginners because I can see, you know, the development so quick. You know, in 6 months, they would beat the shit out of themselves. You know, like the earlier version. So yeah, I usually start by teaching a lot of like principles, you know, so they understand positioning, they understand distance and stuff like that. And then we make a lot of games and drills around that. You know, I started teaching more after like the ecological approach last couple of years. So yeah, that's how I approach it. But and I teach MMA from day one. You know, I really believe MMA should be, you know, trained and viewed as its own sport, not just a collection of other sports, because you know, the rules dictate the tactics. So if the rules change, then the tactics is going to be different. You can see this in like Savat compared to Muay Thai. You know, they both punch and kick, but it's going to be expressed totally different depending on the rule set. If you take a top level Muay Thai guy like Ramon Decker going to Savat, then he's going to get his ass kicked. You take one of the best Savat guys and you put him against the top level Muay Thai guy in Muay Thai, then they're going to lose. So rules dictate tactics, and you know, I really feel that you should teach MMA from day one. You know, unless they're kids and stuff like that. You know, if they're above 16 years old, then you just go MMA. Yeah, that's how I approach it.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting point that you raised there. Do you think that it's important to still do the other martial arts separately as well, though, or do you think it's important to just do MMA? What's your approach on that?
I mean, depends on how much time you have to train. Like, but 99% of the times, I would say prioritize MMA. And then, of course, it's good to spar with other people. You know, spar with boxers, just boxing, or Muay Thai, just Muay Thai, or even better, just compete. I have my fighters competing in all kinds of different stuff just to get that experience, and I did that myself. But a lot of times, you're going to end up spending unnecessary time, because it's always like this. It's always about return on investment, right? So I have a limited amount of training time, and I have a limited amount of recovery, you know, between the classes. And where do I spend my points, right? Is it better to you know, go to jiu-jitsu class and work on a spider guard for 1.5 hours, or should I be working on my get-ups against the cage? And if you want to compete MMA, then, you know, most times it's going to be better for you to work on, you know, cage work, or going from strikes to takedown, or takedowns to strikes and stuff like that. Then of course there's always exceptions, like maybe I have a great guy, you know, in my town, or in my gym or whatever, and you know, I can learn a lot from training with him because I don't have any other training partners, or I'm just really tired of training, I fucking hate it right now. Then you just do something else for a while that's still connected to it. But most of the time, I think you should spend it in MMA.
Yeah, yeah. The point you're making there about spending an hour and a half learning the spider guard when you don't compete in a gi in MMA,
Yeah,
you know, it is a pointless task at that point.
yeah,
And that's the difference between just being a martial artist versus being an MMA fighter, and wanting to get to that level.
yeah.
Because, you know, as a general martial artist, sure, that's great. You know,
Yeah, of course, of course. And I love jiu-jitsu and I love Muay Thai. And again, I competed in these stuff, and I love them on their own. But, you know, again, most people have very limited time. If you as a coach, if you take like let's take a curriculum or whatever you want to call it for MMA, this is the stuff I want to teach in like a year or whatever, and you put it on paper, then you start seeing, man, it's so much we have to learn and so much we have to be competent in. And because even if we don't like throw up triangles from the bottom, we need to know how to defend them, right? And then like, okay, and like if you put it on paper and really try to plan it out, you see that the time is not there. We need to really make the most out of the time we have to build competence in all these areas, right? There's not really a lot of time to spend on stuff that's not going to give that much return on investment, right? Same thing goes with volume and intensity. I had somebody ask me about, because Firas Sahabi was talking about volume, and volume is great if you have that life. You know, if I was a Soviet trainer or a Cuban, whatever, boxing or wrestling coach, then I would have kids in training camp 350 days a year, you know, and they train 6 to 8 hours a day. They have their food and everything prepared. They're not doing anything else. Then I would coach them totally different than the people I have now. Who usually have regular works and they have to go to school and you know, all these other responsibilities. So if you don't have that unlimited time, then that's going to change, you know, how you train, and you can't just copy somebody else. You know, you have to make it relevant for the group that you have. You know?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier about making the most out of that hour and a half that you have in your training session. Because, like, say, if you've got 6 to 8 hours a day, that's great.
Yeah.
You know,
slow down, go easy. You know, be careful with your body and stuff like that. But if you don't, then you know, intensity gonna have to take the place of all that volume, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to MMA, what do you think is? I always view, and a lot of coaches that I've had have told me the same thing, that the wrestling is this real linchpin part of MMA, because if you know how to wrestle, you can either keep it on the feet if you're the better striker, or you can take it to the floor if you're the better grappler. When you're training, do you have a real heavy emphasis on learning the wrestling, or what's your approach to that?
Yeah, we wrestle a lot. And it changed throughout the year because, again, like you say, like it doesn't matter how good you are striking. If you can't keep it on the feet, then what's your striking worth? Like you saw James Toney going against, you know, Randy Couture. Like James Toney is one of my favorite boxers. It lasted for about 20 seconds. You know, and same thing, you can be the best jiu-jitsu guy, but if you can't take it to the ground, then what does it mean? And also, if you're a good wrestler, then you can kind of decide who stays on top and who stays on the bottom. And I think the mistake people do is think that, man, I can never catch up with these wrestlers, Dagestani wrestlers or guys like that. Like they competed in wrestling all their life and everything. I can never be as good wrestler as they are. And it's true, you can't, but you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to be a better fighter, MMA fighter, right? And just because you don't have that background in wrestling doesn't mean that you can't take them down. Look at Alexander Gustafsson. He took down, you know, John Jones, where Daniel Cormier had had to work, you know, spend a lot of energy. He took him down like 2 or 3 times. He took down Daniel Cormier too, who was Olympic silver medalist. You know why? Because he set it up with his strikes. And most of wrestling, once you learn the basics, it's going to be a lot of setups. Tie ups and wrist controls and all that stuff. That's a lot of. But in MMA, our setups is a jab, is uppercut, whatever, level changes, whatever. So, I think a mistake people do is they feel that they can never catch up with the wrestler. So that's why I'm not going to do it. But you don't have to catch up with them in wrestling. You have to catch up with them in MMA. And same goes, like we had this super, super, good Cuban wrestler here for a while. And I even asked Joel Romero about him. And Joel Romero said that he was the best youth wrestler in Cuba. But when he was new against the cage, my guys dominated him. In the center of the cage, they didn't have any chance at all. I mean, he threw everybody, the most beautiful wrestling I've seen. But against the cage, of course, then he can learn. And but in the beginning, he wasn't used to that, so he had a lot of problems. So yeah, I really believe you need to work a lot of wrestling, but you need to keep a positive mindset about it, that you can actually do it.
Yeah. I think that's what you're saying. There's a really important point to raise, is that if you think you can't do something, you're probably not going to be very good at that.
Exactly.
Whereas if you take that and just flip it and go, well, I don't need to be as good as them, but what you're saying there about I need to make it work for MMA, which is a different sport to wrestling.
Exactly. And there's so many other, like, uses of wrestling, if you don't get a takedown, if I establish a credible threat of a takedown, you know, then you're going to have to react to that. And instead of feeling like, oh, I couldn't take him down, I should feel like, oh, perfect. Now I know how you're going to react, you know, because next time my level change, your hands are going to drop, you're going to frame or sprawl or whatever. And I can come up with that uppercut. And then, you know, I start playing this game where I get into your head and, you know, you start reacting to me. So, yeah, that I think that's very important.
Yeah.
But the problem with wrestling for a lot of people is that it's the area that requires the most physique, more physique than boxing and jiu-jitsu. And I feel it's the area where it's the most injuries too. So you kind of have to build up and you have to teach people how to wrestle a little bit more relaxed. You know, when I go with these, like, you know, Russian, you know what I mean, these kind of guys, these kind of wrestlers, or, you know, the Iranian wrestlers and stuff like that, they're very soft in their body. It almost feels like jiu-jitsu. You don't get hurt. And if you can teach your guys to wrestle in a way where it doesn't hurt and where you don't have to get injured, where you don't have to, you know, your neck is you know, bashed up afterwards or whatever, then people are going to enjoy it a lot more, and they can do it a lot more. Because if you don't have time on the mat, if you don't have enough, you know, time wrestling, then you're never going to get good at it. So this goes for anything, right? So you got to figure out ways where you can wrestle and not, you know, get too banged up because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that moves perfectly into one of the last things I wanted to speak to you about.
Mm-hmm.
The ethos towards how you train, more specifically with sparring. How do you approach sparring with your guys?
And I'm one of those old school guys that feel that you need time in the fire, you know, because everybody's like, you know, I understand the problems with it, that you don't want to leave your best rounds in training. You want to, you know, and I understand that there is a cost, you know, it's never good to get hit in the head. But at the same time, I feel that unless you're some sort of, you know, psychopath that doesn't really have the same kind of emotions, you need to have your time in the fire at some point, you know. And whether that time in the fire comes from competing a lot or hard sparring, then you know, it doesn't really matter. But you need to have your time in the fire to be able to handle the stress of a fight, because you always say this, people like, it feels so different when I go into a fight, you know, it's, I couldn't get my thing working or whatever. And it's not, you know, people prepare sometimes for a marathon when it's a sprint. If you train one way and you compete a totally different way, then of course it's going to feel weird. It's not going to feel the same. It's not going to have that transfer. So I believe in hard sparring, or at least getting your time in the fire at some point. Then, of course, you have to look at the drawbacks. So you can wrestle really hard. You can go to the body really hard. You don't necessarily have to go to the head really hard. And the older athlete gets, the more experience they get, the less they can do that type of sparring. But that's my mindset around it. And I think it holds true. There's a lot of myths around this. Like, again, I saw somebody talking about, yeah, the Cuban boxers only do light sparring. And it's not true. You know, I see this Cuban guy is like they're 8 years old and they're crying because they have, you know, their head hurts, and the coach is like, listen, you just gotta go. And same time with Muay Thai, a lot of the gyms, they go hard sparring too. Not Muay Thai, but they go boxing hard. So I have a friend who was I used to train with Chris Foster. He's the head coach of Venom in Thailand, Venom in Bangkok. And I asked him, how do you approach sparring? It's like, yeah, we do one Thai sparring a week and then 2 hard boxing sparring. So then they go all out there too. So I think you the main part of the main thing with sparring, or like that type of match sparring, is to get used to the intensity, you know, get it vaccinated against that intensity. I call it the vaccine, because look, what is a vaccine? You get a little bit of the thing that makes you sick, right? But you get it at a level where you can handle it. If you get too much of the disease, then you're just going to get worse. Then you're just going to get sick. So it's also important that you match the intensity of sparring to a level where people can handle it, right? But and I just want to give people a little bit of that sickness that is fighting, you know. And And I have a lot of different ways of doing that. Like sometimes I let my guys warm up in the dressing room instead of on the mat, or they can warm up with each other, or I have people watching or put on some weird music or audience, whatever. I make different ways of simulating the feeling of a fight. Or you can go against him 3 rounds, whatever. I always want to play like a little bit mind games with people. So that's another way of getting people, adjusted to the intensity without necessarily punching each other in the head.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, that vaccine thing. I've never heard that.
Yeah, but you have to go there at some point. Then there, of course, there are people who are like you look at John Jones, his first fight, he just looked like, but these are outliers, right? Like I couldn't approach that, and I don't know anybody else. Maybe Alistair Overeem was kind of that. He was very emotionless, but most people can't really. It's going to be hard. And I really like that vaccine analogy, actually, and you can see it in a lot of times, and because it also shows you how you can't put too much pressure on somebody. Competing is good, but you don't want to throw them in there where you just get beat up for 3 rounds and feel like they have no control of what they're doing. Win or lose is not important, but it's important that they feel they have some level of control. I made it, and okay, I didn't win, but I had some kind of. Then you get stronger. If you get beat up and you don't feel like you have any control, then you just get weaker. And I ask my guys to not just have result goals when they compete, but also performance goals. So I ask them to have like 3 or 4 things that, maybe I want to try and jab this fight. I want to try a takedown. I want to warm up in this way. So they have more ways of evaluating the competition, more just than the result. Okay, I took him down. I did a really good warm up. So I had 2 out of 4 things that I wanted to, do. And okay, so that's okay, right?
Yeah, that's I always find it really interesting talking to, especially someone like yourself. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to start doing this, is so that I can learn.
It's very smart of you. I like it. You have the mindset for a great coach, because I feel is what great. There's a lot of coaches there who have good names. They're not great coaches. They just ended up in the right position at the right time. But there are some guys who are really great coaches, and these are necessarily not the people that people, the guys that people know about. Like I have a friend from Poland, Kamil. I think he's a great, great coach. He never had any experience in the martial art. He was an actor, a method actor. But that got too much. He got too involved with that. And then he started coaching people. And I really think like he's a great, great coach. He's very, engaged in his fighters. He makes sure they no ego. He have them travel to different gyms where they can, work on whatever he feels that they need to work on. And he's always studying and always learning. And yeah, that's a great coach. But he approaches the same way I feel. Maybe I think you're doing. You're just asking a bunch of questions and coming back to, the advice that you asked me about the advice for a young coach. And it's just ask questions, right? Ask a million questions. That has always been, I should have told you that before, but that was always my number 1 rule, because traveling with Alistair, I got access to all these gyms, all these coaches. And my number 1 rule was, even if I'm like a Swedish guy, we're not that social most of the time, but I promised myself to push myself to ask, if there's somebody who knows something that I want to know, I have to ask them questions, So it doesn't matter. Like Greg Jackson, I had like daily questions for him. Like, how do you study fights? Or how do you do that and whatever? And I feel when you're genuine in your interest, then these people will have no problem answering you either, because they're good at what they're doing, because they loved it too. At some point, maybe they're not doing it anymore, but they can feel, they can see themselves in you, right? And then it's going to be easier for them to. Then there's a bunch of people asking, but they're not genuine and really wanted to learn. They just want some attention, right? That's different. But if you really try and improve and you really try better, just ask questions. Ask anybody question. You just write anybody. That's what I do sometimes. I just write somebody. Listen, what do you think about this? And just like you did me, you write me, and then I was like, yeah, cool, nice. Another MMA nerd or whatever, martial art nerd. We're on the same team.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's it. And it's about asking the right things, I think, as well, because I could sit here and I could ask you loads of questions about like, oh, what's it like with Alistair Overeem and all of that sort of
Yeah,
stuff. I want to learn. I want to learn as much as I can from you in this hour or however
yeah.
long it is about
Yeah,
how to
but you can
achieve
feel that, on the other side, you can feel that. And then it's no problem asking this question. Then you get excited yourself,
Mm.
I'm sure as a coach, and there's a lot of people who want your attention, but a lot of them don't really want to learn. They just want attention. And then like that gets tiresome in the end, because you tell them the same thing and there's really no change or whatever, And so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. I am very thankful for your time. That's been a phenomenal chat. I've learned loads, and I hope anybody who listens to this learns loads as well. Where can everybody find you?
Coach Engberg on Instagram. I think that's the easiest way. Yeah. That's where I'm most active. Yeah.